Welcome to Changing Minds with your host, King of the Broad-Minded Thinkers, Daryl Davis. Presenting guests with original thought-provoking content, bringing you wider perspectives on things you know, and challenging you with information you've never considered. Tired of the same old, same old? This is the place to be.
Changing Minds.
Welcome to Changing Minds. I'm your host, Daryl Davis. Arno Michaelis first became involved in the white power skinhead movement at the age of 17. He went on to co-found the largest white power skinhead organization in our country, called Hammerskin Nation. From there, he also took up membership in the ultra-racist group Church of the Creator, founded and led by the late ultra-vehement racist Ben Klassen. But Arno has since left the white power movement, and in the ensuing years has founded Life After Hate, an organization for former white supremacists who now want to help de-radicalize those in the movement, as well as help discourage others from joining. Arno has written 2 books detailing his life both in and out of the movement. His first book, My Life After Hate, and the second book, co-written with his friend Pardeep Kaleka, The Gift of Our Wounds. Welcome to the show, Arno.
Daryl, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's start with Serve to Unite. What exactly is that?
Serve to Unite is actually an act of defiance. It came about in response to the August 5th, 2012 Sikh temple shooting, where a guy who was a member of the skinhead gang that I helped to start walked into a place of worship on a sunny Sunday morning and he just started shooting people. He ended up murdering 6 people that day. One person he shot that day was in a vegetative state up until early this year. And that man, whose name was Baba Punjab Singh, finally passed away, bringing the death toll of the attack, including the shooter, to 8 people. The other people killed in the attack were Sita Singh, Ranjit Singh, Prakash Singh, Suvig Singh Katra, Paramjit Kaur, and Satwant Singh Kaleka. Satwant was the last person murdered that day, and he was the last person murdered because he was fighting off the gunman with a butter knife, which is the only weapon he had. And he died about 15 feet away from a door that he could have ran out of at any time. The door led to the outside. But rather than flee and save himself, Satwant stayed and fought, and his bravery bought enough time for the Oak Creek Police Department to arrive. The first responding officer is a guy named Lieutenant Brian Murphy. Lieutenant Murphy got in a firefight with the shooter. His name was Wade Page. And Murph took the worst of it. He was shot 15 times, miraculously survived largely because of body armor and his just refusal to die. And the next responding officer mortally wounded the shooter, who then took his own life. Pardeep Kaleka is Satwant's eldest son. And a couple months after the shooting, Pardeep reached out to me, knowing that I was a former white nationalist and that I was involved in the starting the gang that produced the shooter. And Pardeep reached out to me really because he wanted to understand how someone could commit such an atrocity. But he also reached out to me because I was one of very few people who were showing any kind of accountability for this. I felt at the time, and I still do, that I'm responsible in a way for this atrocity that happened, and that I helped to set the stage that this shooter walked out on.
Now, this is you're referring to the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it happened August 5th, 2012.
Right, and you're from Milwaukee. How far is Oak Creek from Milwaukee?
Yeah, Oak Creek's just a suburb about 10 miles south. So it's very much in the area and very much like literally in my backyard. And that was another big part of the urgency I felt to help respond to this hate crime. And really just I think it's really important when trauma like this happens that we just go to offer ourselves and just be present for the people who are affected by the violence, and not go with some kind of agenda like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do, like, having some kind of idea of how you're going to help. I think it's more important to just be there and to listen and to make yourself available to the people who are suffering, and let them tell you how you can help. And essentially that's what Pardeep did.
Now, when Pardeep contacted you out of the blue, right? What was your initial thought? Is this guy coming for revenge? Why is he calling me? All this kind of thing. What were the thoughts running through your head?
Well, I went public with my story on the MLK holiday of 2010. So by August 5th, 2012, I had built a bit of a platform as like the former white supremacist guy. And I had done a ton of media in the week following the shooting. I media worldwide and a ton of local media. So Pardeep had seen me on there, and I had seen Pardeep as well. He had done some media himself. Pardeep's father, Sitwant, was the president and founder of the Sikh temple. And Pardeep's he's just a really brilliant guy, and he's very well spoken, and he's kind of a magnet for cameras himself. So when I first heard from him, I knew who he was. And my first thought was really that I felt very honored and humbled that he was reaching out to me. He reached out via email. It was very plain in his email that he was a supporter of the work I had been doing, and he was grateful for my presence after the shooting. He said all that in the email, but he also said something which puzzled me at the time, but has since come to make sense. And he said that when he contacted me in October, he was at a low point since the shooting. I have lost a couple of friends in my life to street violence. Back in my white nationalist days, I had 2 friends who were murdered in street fights, but the context is so much different now. And the other thing that's very different is I was profuse drinker back then, and being so numbed by alcohol, when I experienced those 2 deaths, it was really difficult for me to get my head around what somebody would be going through having their father murdered in a hate crime like that. So when Pardeep said he was at a low point 2 months later, it didn't make sense until he explained that after the shooting, everything was such a blur. It was all the media. It was all, not just the media, but his father, who came to the United States with nothing, had built a very healthy, thriving small business that still continued to run after he was killed. And Pardeep had to attend to that small business. And then he had to attend to his widowed mother.
So there was no grieving process, no time to reflect and introspect and all of that.
Exactly. It wasn't until the dust settled in October or so that it really started to sink in that he was never going to see his dad again, that his unborn child was never going to meet their grandpa, that his mom, who sleeping by herself at night for the first time in 30 years, was crying herself to sleep. Like, all these really harsh realities started to sink in. And I think that's what explained the low point he was at and why he reached out to me. We agreed to have dinner, and we met for dinner and ended up talking for 4.5 hours, mostly about just our lives and our dads and who we were. And we found out that we had so much more in common than different. We were both pretty inspired walking out of there. Pardeep and his brother Amardeep and other people who had lost loved ones in the shooting, within days of the shooting, the concept for Serve to Unite was born. And the concept was born out of the Sikh faith and the principles of their faith, which are seva, or service to other human beings, and also oneness, the oneness of humanity, the oneness of all God's creation, the oneness of all life, are the principles behind the idea for Serve to Unite. And it was very inspiring because really all human spirituality of any form is built upon those foundations of service and oneness. And the idea was to start this movement that would bring people together on a growing and scaling basis from that day forward to defy the hate and violence that led to the attack.
Now, Pardeep and his family are from India. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Pardeep and his family are Punjabi. It's a province in northern India that it actually includes a good chunk of Pakistan, and it was kind of split right down the middle by the British back in the 40s, I believe. And but that's where the Sikh faith was born, and most Sikhs in the world are connected to that area in one way or another.
What was it about that you think possessed Wade Page to go to that particular temple and attack these people?
That's a great question. There's a lot of speculation. And first of all, I'd reiterate that Page took his own life after being mortally wounded by the second responding officer. So we'll never know truly what Page's motivations were. But having literally been who he was myself, I got a pretty good educated guess as to what motivated him to attack the Gurdwara. A lot of people speculate that he mistook Sikhs for Muslims, which has been a common occurrence, especially since 9/11. There's been a lot of violence against Sikh people who, for Sikhs, part of their faith is the articles of faith. So they wear a turban. They don't cut any of the hair there on their bodies. So they have long beards. The men do. I don't think that Page thought they were Muslims because Page was actually radicalized in the U.S. military. And before he was dishonorably discharged for alcoholism, he was part of the PSYOPs division. So he was in intelligence, and I believe his training would have enlightened him that Sikhs weren't Muslims. I think he chose the Gurdwara that morning for two reasons. One was ideologically driven. I think that with the Sikh articles of faith, with the turban and the beard, Sikhs are just visibly different and visibly other, according to Page, more so than some other ethnic and religious minorities in this country.
All right, let me stop right there. You think color of skin had anything to do with it? Because by the same token, you have groups of Mennonites, you have groups of Amish who are different than, let's say, the mainstream. He didn't go after them.
Yeah, no, the color of their skin absolutely had something to do with it. The Sikhs being from northern India, brown skinned, they're plainly not white. To Page, they're plainly not American, and I think he chose them just because of their articles of faith, but also certainly because of their skin color. I don't think it was. I don't think the Mennonites and the Amish were in any danger of being attacked by Wade Page. The other, I think, purely tactical reason I think that he chose the Sikh temple is that it was a soft target. The building is set back quite a bit from the street. At the time, there was a pretty large building in front between the Gurdwara and the main street that kind of shielded it from easy viewing by passerby.
For our listeners, what is the Gurdwara?
Gurdwara is just the name for a Sikh temple. So I think that the fact that the Sikhs were such a visible other to him, a different skin color, the turban, the beard, and the fact that the Gurdwara was set back from the street quite a bit, I believe those are the factors that led him to choose that as his target.
Wow. Now let's talk about Serve to Unite. So you and Pardeep Kaleka have co-founded this organization, Serve to Unite. And the function and mission statement of this organization is what?
Serve to Unite brings people of all ages and backgrounds together through service learning and global engagement. We began primarily as a K-12 school initiative. We've worked with kindergartners through grade 12 and kids in college. We've since branched out to also work with small towns and municipalities who are going through demographic change. And the common thread is that service is a universal language. So when somebody needs help and you go help them, that speaks to us on a spiritual level. No matter what background we come from, ethnically or religiously, it's something that resounds within the human heart. When we were working in schools, what we did was ask young people what issues in society they were concerned about. And then we helped to brainstorm and carry out service learning projects to address those issues. So, for example, we, especially after Ferguson, we had a lot of young people in Milwaukee's inner city who were concerned about relationships between the Milwaukee Police Department and the community. So we listened to them first and foremost, and did so without judgment and without putting our opinions into it. And then we facilitated ways for these young people to come together with uniformed members of the Milwaukee Police Department and have dialogue. And we had a system that MPD actually helped to develop where the students could ask questions anonymously to the cops. So they weren't intimidated by a threat or worried about how the cop would react. And this resulted in really difficult questions being asked of these officers. And the officers answered them very frankly and from their own personal experience. And you could see the connection happen between these young people and the police. And I think it was a great thing, not only for the young people, but it was also great for the police officers themselves to be able to engage with Milwaukee's young people in a non-confrontational, non-enforcement sort of environment. And while this is all happening, we had a live drawer with a big blank sheet of paper about 4 feet by 6 feet, kind of illustrating the conversation as it was happening. And we then took the finished illustrations and put them out into the city as art exhibits to further spark conversation and also just to demonstrate that this dialogue is the answer and it's entirely possible. And probably most beautifully, it was initiated and carried out by our young people. And so that's what Serve Unite's all about.
Yeah, and while you're on the topic of police, I think that's a great thing because there's always been some tension between the Black community and the police community, and they need to work hand in hand just as they do with anybody else. We need that relationship, and dialogue is indeed the key. But now, what do you think it is? I mean, back in the day when you were involved in the white power movement, I know there are plenty of law enforcement officers who were involved in it. And I'm not just talking about undercover cops who were members, getting intelligence and foiling, your plots to do whatever it is, you were going to do. I'm talking about bona fide believers in white supremacy. Did you ever meet any of those types of officers? Did you have any in your group? And how did they come to that ideology?
Well, when I was active, we had a very, very hostile idea of law enforcement and military. We saw them as agents of a Zionist occupational government, and we did not consider them our allies. And we honestly, during my 7-year involvement in hate groups, I never had contact with anyone from law enforcement that was remotely friendly. I do recall on my way out, and this was like outside of the movement even, I knew a guy who was a mechanic, and it was one of those type of things where as the car's getting fixed, you're sitting around drinking beers, and he had some cop buddies that would come in there and they'd drink beers while the cars are getting fixed also. On the way out, I met these cops who were sympathetic to the white nationalist cause. But I don't know that they were officially affiliated with any sort of group. And again, this is like at the time where I had already decided I was done with it, and I was going to move on with my life. Interestingly, Pardeep, who is a true Renaissance man, was a police officer in Milwaukee's 7th District for 5 years. A lot of people don't understand that Milwaukee is a really rough place. We have a severely depressed inner city. We have the very humiliating dishonor of being the worst place in the United States to be a Black person. As far as every measurement of success and health there is, it's worse in Milwaukee, Wisconsin than it is anywhere else in the United States if you're Black.
What do you attribute that to?
The segregation is just absolutely crushing. And it was segregation that was engineered by many years of social policy. So there are places in Milwaukee's inner city where you could go for miles after miles and not see a single white person. And a lot of these the young people I've worked with in Milwaukee's inner city, sometimes they'll be 10, 12, 11 years old before they meet a white person outside of school. And the effects of the segregation have caused just rampant and systematic horrific living conditions where you're just this cycle of poverty and crime and addiction and violence, and it makes it really difficult to just survive, much less get a leg up. And I think the fact that a lot of the rest of the state of Wisconsin tends to look down on Milwaukee and see it as like a big problem and one that should be further defunded and further ignored, really just exacerbates the problem.
Now, I think it's important for our listeners to know, I mean, they know that you're out of the movement, as you know, I've already discussed in your intro, but I think it's important for them to know why you got out. What were the driving factors?
Well, the biggest driving factor, and one of the reasons why you're such a hero to me, Daryl, is because it was people who were like you, who refused to capitulate to my hostility and refused to hate me back. Everything I did as a white nationalist skinhead was meant to provoke hostility. I wanted people to hate me. I wanted people to swing at me. I wanted violence. And whether I got my ass kicked or I kicked somebody else's ass, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the violence itself. I got beat up plenty of times. I'm a big, gnarly dude, but I'm not very coordinated, and I was not a particularly talented fighter. I kind of led with my face, and I'm suffering the physical consequences now at age 49.
How many times and how long could you take beating up before you realize, hey, this is not for me? Or but also realize that you can't beat the racism or Nazism or nationalism out of somebody. So you're getting beat up. Did you ever think at the time, maybe I need to get out of this?
I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, Daryl, which you know already. To me, the violence was just it was a way to just
cathartic.
It was a way to distract myself from this knowledge that what I was doing was wrong. I knew deep down from day one that it was wrong to hate people, much less attack them because of the color of their skin. I knew it was wrong to deny the Holocaust. I knew all these things were wrong, but I didn't care because I just wanted that thrill that I got from repulsing people.
One of the funniest stories that I've heard you tell, I mean, I've heard a lot of them, and they all are great. But one of the funniest ones, so hypocritical, but yet so typical. I want you to share with our listeners of how you would have to sneak around and watch the Green Bay Packers and explain to our listeners why the white power supremacy movement did not allow things like that.
Sure. It's funny now, I've been working in counter-violent extremism internationally for a decade. And I work with a former violent extremists of every stripe, including a lot of former jihadis. And the more we talk, the more just plain as day the common threads are between the jihadi ideology and the white nationalist ideology. And one of them being that in Islam, in a broad sense, haram is sin. And in proper, healthy Islam, like being greedy or being hateful, that's haram, that's a sin. But as far as jihadis go, they like to point fingers at everything they don't like, say Western society is haram, the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue is haram. They got a big long list of what's haram. And white nationalists have the exact same thought process. We didn't call it haram. We were not allowed to watch Hollywood movies. We couldn't watch anything on TV. We couldn't read anything that wasn't expressly white nationalist. We couldn't listen to music that wasn't expressly white nationalist. And we saw professional sports, interestingly, in the same way that people on the far left often do. We saw professional sports as a distraction to numb white people from their oppression. And on the far left, they won't say white people, but it's something to distract the masses of how they're being exploited by the capitalists, yada, yada, yada. So while the particulars of the ideological differences may be different. The basic theme is the same. And so we saw professional sports as a plot by Jews to dumb white people down so they could be easier controlled. As anybody who likes professional football understands, a successful football team is not going to be a bunch of white guys. Every team in the NFL it's primarily a bunch of black guys and a bunch of white guys. Sometimes you'll see some Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander people, but it's primarily black guys and white guys
working together.
Exactly. And if you want to have a prayer or win in a football game, you not only have to work together, you got to work as a unit. You got to see these guys as not only your equals, but just as part of the same organism to function well enough to win a football game. And so the football in Wisconsin is just about a cult. I mean, we wear cheese on our heads. That's how much we get into our football. And I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up, loving the Green Bay Packers. And on Sundays, as a white power skinhead, I couldn't very well get all my white power buddies together to watch the Packer game. If I would have suggested such a thing, I would have been accused of being a race traitor. To the white nationalist ideology, enjoying an NFL football game makes you complicit in the destruction of the white race. And I knew all this because I preached it. I was very good at preaching it. If I had a new kid recruited into the group, I would start right there telling him how the Jews are trying to poison his mind with football and TV and Hollywood movies, yada, yada, yada. But on Sundays, when I could, I'd sneak away from my buddies and I'd lock myself in my dingy little efficiency apartment and turn on this battered, crappy old TV I had, very low, because I didn't want to get caught doing this. I literally had to sneak around to watch a Packer game. And even as I'm cheering for the Packers, I had to be like, woo, like I had to be very low key so nobody could hear me whooping if there was a touchdown or an interception or something. And it wasn't lost on me how ridiculous that was. I felt like a hypocrite for doing it. And there was a big part of me saying, like, dude, you can't even watch a Packer game. Like, why are you even bothering with this? Why are you even bothering with this white nationalism? And the answer was because in the movement, as we called it, I had a very inflated sense of identity that was really based in fear and ignorance. It wasn't based in genuine respect, but I was a big deal. I was a founder of Hammerskin Nation. I was a reverend in the Church of the Creator. I was lead vocals for a very successful by white power standards, white power band. I had stature. Whereas outside of the movement in real life, I was a alcoholic high school dropout in his early 20s who was too much of a drunk to keep his bills paid and had to keep moving back home with his parents. And he had a tendency to drink until he passed out and then piss all over himself. Like, that's who I was in real life. And the idea of facing the cold reality of who I was and giving up all this stature that I had in the movement was pretty imposing. And it took that feeling of hypocrisy that the Green Bay Packers helped to drive home, along with the sitcom Seinfeld and Hollywood movies that I loved and music that I loved. It brought me to the point where I was looking for an excuse to leave in 1994. And that happened when a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight. And this is a couple months after I had become a single parent to my 18-month-old daughter. And so it finally hit me, if I didn't leave at that point, death or prison was going to take me from her.
Okay. You mentioned, again, Church of the Creator, which was founded by a fellow named Ben Klassen. You met Ben Klassen, I take it, when you joined that organization. Well, tell me a little bit about the late Ben Klassen.
Well, I met Ben Klassen being one of the inaugural attendees of the School for Gifted Boys, which was a kind of a racist summer camp that he had set up at the Church of the Creator compound in Otto, North Carolina, in the middle of the Smoky Mountains. It was very beautiful there. We actually had a lot of fun there, probably more fun than Ben Klassen wanted us to have. We had read all his books before we went to the actual compound in North Carolina. We were very enamored of him. The idea of creativity, as the Church of the Creator was called, was that might makes right, and it was all based on the ridiculously scientifically incorrect assumption that white people are somehow a different species from everyone else. And going from that false presumption, the idea was that white people, by natural law, not only had the right but the duty to fight for white people and white people alone. And we shouldn't care about what happens to black people or Jewish people or Latinos or anybody who's not white. And we should behave like other animals in nature and just fight for our own people and not care about anybody else. And it was a very convoluted ideology. It was vehemently atheistic and anti-Christian, which also appealed to me, as that I had been odds with Christianity for all my life at that point. And it was called a church just because it saw religion, or race as religion rather than some sort of higher power. As the messed up teenager I was, that all appealed to me. But then when I go to North Carolina and I meet Ben Clausen, he's this like tiny, doddering old man with his pants hiked up to his armpits. And he sounded like kind of like the Deputy Dog cartoon character.
The white race is nature's finest creation.
It was just very, very underwhelming from what we were expecting. We were barely able to contain ourselves and stop from openly disrespecting him. But I did get into it with him in that our days at the School for Gifted Boys consisted of Bible study in the morning, which we'd spend the morning reading his book, The White Man's Bible, with him. And it was just like a Christian Bible study. He would have us read chapters, and we didn't discuss them. He would tell us what was going on with these chapters. And at one point, I questioned him, and the chapter we were reading was something to the effect of the planet Earth is the white race's one and only home. And Clausen felt it was very important that we not bother ourselves with space exploration and things like that, because the planet Earth is all we need, and we're going to conquer it. It'll be all white people. It'll be great. And as I heard this, I was like, well, but, and he called himself the Pontifex Maximus. So we had to call him Pontifex. So I would say, like, well, excuse me, Pontifex, but our race we're the greatest explorers ever, and it's our nature to explore. And once we've conquered the planet Earth, we need to explore something. So wouldn't it make sense that we go to explore the galaxy then? Kind of like the space Nazi idea. And he got really upset. And in his little deputy dog way, he's like, no, that's not how it he's like admonishing me, and it was all I could do to not bust out laughing at him. And the guys I was there with were having a hard time not laughing at him either. But after meeting him in person, it definitely took a lot of the shine off of who we felt he was. But we did, while we were in the movement, always value the ideology and kind of took it and ran with it ourselves.
Yeah, I remember him back when he was alive. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he was an inventor of sorts. Didn't he have something to do with the electric can opener or something?
Yeah, I believe it was in the 40s. He had patented a form of electric can opener that at the time was valuable enough to get him a little chunk of money, but then it was like before too long, someone else invented a better one. And his revenue stream from the can opener dried up, but he took the revenue he did make and he put it into real estate and became pretty wealthy from it. I don't know what his total net worth was. And interestingly, I was there with two other white nationalists that were part of my group. And I was probably the wealthiest background of all of them. But my family, by the standards of the neighborhood we lived in, we were the poor kids. And so anybody who had a house was rich to me, and certainly to my colleagues at the time. And so I don't know, how rich Ben Clausen actually was, but by our standards, he was rich.
Yeah. Wow. Well, yeah, and now the Church of the Creator has become the World Church of the Creator.
It has. It's interesting that a lot of these groups come and go. The Church of the Creator is certainly long past its zenith. There was a time, really, when we were in there and really pushing with it, where it had worldwide connections. There was Church of the Creator chapters all over the world. After Ben Clausen took his own life, and there's a ton of infighting over the scraps and the remains of the buildings and the piles of books and things like that. Really kind of marked the downfall of it. But I wouldn't say that the COTC is much of a thing anymore.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about your books. Let's talk about your first book, My Life After Hate, and you also co-founded an organization, My Life After Hate. But let's talk about your book.
Yeah, the book was actually titled after the organization that I founded. Actually, in summer of 2009, as a means of self-publishing my memoir, it occurred to me that I could start a website and call the website Life After Hate, and invite other former white supremacists as well as other violent extremists of all sorts of different backgrounds and survivors of violent extremism, just to come together and write about compassion. And
so you mean former violent extremism?
Exactly, former violent extremists. And that's I put the three words Life After Hate together in the summer of 2009. I registered the domain names lifeafterhate.org and lifeafterhate.com. Months later, I started inviting other former white nationalists to become a part of it. And some of them got involved to one degree or another, but none of them put a whole lot of work into it early on. Really 90% of the work to get that organization off the ground was done by myself and a brilliant woman named Angie Aker, who wrote one of the forewords to My Life After Hate. And Angie never had a racist bone in her body, but she was a survivor of domestic violence. And as I was writing the book and interviewing a lot of my former peers, the domestic dysfunction was a very clear common thread. So I thought it made a lot of sense to have Angie involved, and she's a brilliant writer and thinker, and she and I got Life After Hate off the ground as an online magazine. I self-published the book like chapter by chapter on a month-to-month basis through the Life After Hate website, and then actually published the book in a book form in November of 2010. And so a year later, we, with a brilliant special education teacher from Portland, Oregon, named Julie Sanders, we published a teacher's edition of My Life After Hate. And this is after she had used the book to teach character development and literacy skills with her special education students. The book was it's self-published. It's going through Amazon Publishing right now. I had some people do copy editing, but it was largely me that put it together. And it's, I kind of call it a memoirella. It's not like a proper full-blown memoir. It starts out, the first 4 chapters are really kind of present-day reflection back on my past as to how and why things went the way they did. And then there's some actual back-in-the-moment memoir-type chapters about my early days in the movement, my middle days in the movement, and when I started to get exhausted, and then when I started getting out. And then the book ends up with a dialogue between myself and someone who had contacted me in 2010 looking for advice to get out of hate groups. So that's how My Life After Hate came about. It was very much helped to launch Life After Hate, the online magazine, to become, by the time I left in 2012, a really amazing statement about human compassion. We had over 200 articles from over 100 authors from all over the world, published in 4 or 5 different languages, I believe. The people that I had put on the board of the nonprofit when we formed as a nonprofit basically kicked me out of my own organization. And today they are all suing each other over whose intellectual property the words Life After Hate are. It's a sad statement on some ethical issues, but that's how it shook down, really.
Now, you touched on on a thing that needs, I think, more exploration and trying to figure out the relationship between that, between hate, white supremacy, and domestic violence. There hasn't been a whole lot of I've heard about it, I've seen it, but it hasn't been really talked about and discussed. What is that correlation? How does that come about, and why does it exist?
The very simple answer is just that hurt people hurt people. Now, that's a theme that a lot of my work is based on. And I was actually going on about all hurt people with a bunch of middle school kids. And one of the middle school kids is like, well, but Arno, not all hurt people, because everybody hurts at one point or another in their lives. And as a Buddhist, that really resounded with me. It's like Buddhism is basically like, yeah, life is suffering, deal with it. That's true. Everybody goes through some kind of trauma in their lives. Everybody suffers in one way or another. And fortunately for humanity, not everybody goes and hurts other people because of it. So it's important to understand that, but it's also important to understand that for people who don't have a healthy way to process their suffering, that's when it very easily can be transferred to other people. So if I'm recruiting, this is very interesting to me now, having worked in intervention of violent extremism for a decade. The intervention process the beginning of it is very similar to the recruitment process. Back when I would recruit people into our white nationalist group, this wasn't like a conscious thing. It wasn't part of the plan. I'm just like looking back on it and realizing this is what I did. But the first thing I wanted to do was to find out what's going wrong in that kid's life. If it's that their dad's a drunk who beats them up, or they don't have a girlfriend, or they can't get a job, they're not popular, they're getting bullied, like whatever it is, I want to find that pain point and then like zero in on it and blame it on Jews and blame it on Black people. Like without that pain point to begin from, I'm not going to be able to get them to the point where they're ready to attack someone else. Like if somebody is happy and well adjusted and they can cope with their trauma and cope with their stress, they're essentially inoculated against falling into white nationalist ideology or any other violent extremist ideology for that matter. So I think to me, it's a prerequisite to being susceptible to violent extremist narrative of having some kind of, in mental health terms, they call it adverse childhood experience. If you have a history of adverse childhood experience, it makes that person so much more ripe and at risk to buy the story you're telling them. Whereas if they don't have that history, or if they have had adverse childhood experiences, but they've processed it in a healthy way, now you're going to have a very hard time convincing that person that everything wrong in their life is somebody else's fault. So that's how the domestic dysfunction is. That's probably the most common form of adverse childhood experience is some kind of domestic dysfunction.
So they need a punching bag, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah, they need someone to blame. And James Baldwin said something to the effect, and I'm probably butchering the beauty of his writing in his quote, but he basically said, I think the reason so many white people hate is because if they let go of their hate, they'd have to deal with their pain.
Oh.
And that so resounds with me because in my case, looking back, that just describes it exactly to a T. And that if I wasn't hating all these other people, I would have to look inward and deal with the pain that I was feeling.
Now, it's often talked about all these males in these organizations. I mean, I know, of course, there are plenty of females involved in white supremacy, white nationalism, etc. What draws females to these organizations? Are they what percentage of them would you say are truly racist, anti-Semitic haters, and what percentage would you say just join because my boyfriend's in it, my husband's in it, that kind of thing?
Well, to be fair, across the board, I don't think anybody. I think the majority of people who get involved in white nationalism they're looking for a means to deal with their trauma more so than they already are like affinity to the ideology, and they're looking for other people who agree with them. I think the ideology is usually like a second stage kind of thing, but for women, it's been my experience, and the movement, as we called it, was then and remains so now very much a sausage party. There's way more guys than women. It was frustrating as a guy back in the day, but fortunately for me, I was one of the more alpha guys, and so I would certainly get my share of the few girls that would come around. But amongst them, those women, there were some that had a lot of leadership ability and were very intelligent and had their own kind of charisma. And they would have positions of leadership, but like within this very misogynist like ideology. So the women leaders would be like telling the other women that they should be barefoot and pregnant and then not argue with the men. That was basically their job, was to kowtow all the other women in the group. There were certainly a good number of women who were just there looking for something to belong to. I knew of some who had been through really rough childhoods and had just all sorts of trauma in their lives and had really horrible self-images. And I think that's what led them to get involved in the movement. And that, again, that's another very important common thread, is that if you have a healthy idea of who you are and of your value as a person, you're not going to get involved in a white nationalist or any other kind of extremist ideology. It's only when you don't have a good idea of who you are and your value as a person, just from that basic core place of value without all the ideology and the geopolitical stuff put on it, that you're going to fall into that trap.
Well, since writing My Life After Hate, you've come to write a second book, and this time co-authored with your friend Pardeep Kaleka. Tell me a little bit about that. It's called The Gift of Our Wounds. That's your latest book.
Yeah, from the time Pardeep and I met, and writing's always been very important to me. It was the reason I wrote My Life After Hate was because I had to reconcile my past, and if I didn't, it was going to kill me. It was that much of a survival mechanism. And when I met Pardeep, I basically said, I'm like, dude, we got to write a book together. And he was kind of like, yeah, maybe we will. And Pardeep's a great writer himself, and him and I would write a lot of stuff for Serve to Unite, and we would write about our pasts and really use writing as a therapy for ourselves. And I believe it was in 15 or so, a literary agent reached out to us and asked us if we would be interested in writing a book. And I was very interested, and Pardeep agreed. And the two of us, it was funny because our literary agent said, she's like, I know you guys are both writers, and Arno, you wrote a book, and you're both great writers, but sometimes it's a good thing to like get a co-author to really take it to another level. And I was very arrogant that I was like, yeah, we write our own books. Thank you very much. We don't need a co-author. And then a month later, our agent's like, okay, do you guys have those sample chapters ready? And I was like, maybe it's not such a bad idea to get a co-author. So our agent connected us with a brilliant woman named Robin Gabby Fisher, who was the New York Star Ledger's human interest writer for 20 years. She's now the journalism chair at Rutgers. I think our book was her 13th, and she's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and a number of her books were New York Times bestsellers. And Robin really did an amazing job of kind of compiling Pardeep and I's respective kind of stream of consciousness writing into a very cohesive story. And one of the reasons that we chose Robin amongst a few great authors who were willing to work with us is I read a book of hers called After the Fire, about two boys who were horribly burned in a dorm fire at a college in New Jersey. And it was really about their recovery from this process of being burned horribly and the brotherhood that they had. And I love the way she depicted their brotherhood and their relationship. And I also felt it was important that we have a woman's perspective on our story. Pardeep and I are both pretty much like dudes. And I think if we were left to our own devices, it would just be a way too much of a testosterone overload in the book. And Robin was a perfect foil for that. So the end product is something we're super happy with, and it's great to have our story available in that form.
Indeed, and both books are excellent. I've read them both, and I think they're absolutely wonderful. The Gift of Our Wounds being Arno's latest, and My Life After Hate being his first. A year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago almost now, I hooked you up with the daughter of the late, great Martin Luther King Jr., and you had a chance to meet her and interview her. How was that? How did it feel being in the presence of the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King, a man who back in the day you hated?
Right. Meeting Bernice King has just been one of a lot of really amazing experiences I've been able to have on this journey, but meeting her especially, and seeing the work that she does today, and really how she's continuing the movement that her father continued as well. Dr. King was inspired by Gandhi, who was inspired by all sorts of other things. So to me, it's a testament to the interdependence of humanity, which both Dr. King and his daughter Bernice really use as the foundation of their work. And at one point, working with Dr. Bernice King, it may have been when we were in Cincinnati, she introduced me as her brother from another mother. And that was a pretty big deal. To have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter introduce you as her brother from another mother, like that to me was one of the greatest gifts I've ever gotten. And I'm always grateful to you, Daryl, for making those connections. It's knowing you is an amazing gift as well.
Well, Arno, you've done some amazing things since coming out of the movement, and the world is certainly a better place for it. And you continue to do those things. One of your latest ventures currently, as well as Serve to Unite, which you continue, and the other organizations you've been involved with, positive organizations, that is. One of the latest ones is Parents for Peace. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've been doing prevention and intervention of violent extremism for 10 years now. And I've done it, Serve to Unite very much fulfills those goals. When we weave social fabric between people, it helps to prevent and intervene in violent extremism. But I hadn't chosen an organization to specifically direct my intervention efforts with. And I chose Parents for Peace for that organization because they treat violent extremism as a public health issue, and one that is not exclusive to any particular demographic. I think it's very, very important when we're addressing violent extremism to draw out the common threads of all these various violent extremist factions that seem to be very different on the surface. But once you start understanding how they operate and how the psychology works, you see that they're actually very, very much in common, if not complete mirror images of each other. And Parents for Peace is very cognizant of this. There are some organizations that focus strictly on white nationalism. There are some that focus strictly on violent Islamism. And while some of these organizations have done some decent work, I think the big fallacy there is to imply, and you certainly do that by focusing on one or the other, that this is an issue that's particular to a group of people, when I think the actual solution to violent extremism itself is to understand that we all share an equal capacity to harm or to heal. And how are you going to teach that if the focus of your organization doesn't reflect that? So Parents for Peace definitely does reflect that. And by doing so, we avoid some of the common pitfalls, which are, if you focus strictly on white nationalism and you go to Joe pissed off white kid and say, hey, how can we help you? The first thing he's going to say is like, why aren't you talking to those Muslims? Why aren't you talking to ISIS? And if you focus strictly on violent Islamism and you're talking to Joe pissed off Muslim kid, he's going to say, why aren't you talking to those neo-Nazis? Why are you just talking to me? Well, Parents for Peace can answer that question and say, look, we talk to everybody. We deal with all that stuff because we agree it's a problem for everyone. It's not particular to white people. It's not particular to Muslims. It's not particular to black people. This is a human issue, and we need to approach it from a public health standpoint. If you look at the history of public health, you can see how public attitudes about things have changed. One of the great examples that our executive director, Miriam Nadri Churchill, provides is this a little before my time, but I remember watching reruns as a kid. Way back when, there was a show called The Honeymooners.
Oh, yeah, Jackie Gleason.
I'm sure it was way before your time too, Daryl. But
no, actually, I knew Sheila McRae, who played on there.
Wow.
Yeah, I did some shows with her. Yeah.
Well, I bring it up because, and you'll remember this then, the catchphrase for Jackie Gleason's character was a line that he would give to his wife. Anytime
Alice.
she did something, to Alice, he would go, pow, straight to the moon. Like he's going to knock her block off. He's going to hit her. And during the time, all these families would be like, oh, that's funny. He's going to hit his wife. Like that's his catchphrase in the most popular comedy that there is in the country. Now today that would be absolutely unthinkable, and for good reason. We shouldn't be joking about domestic violence. Since then, our society sees domestic violence as the problem that it is, and it has nothing to do about losing a sense of humor. It's just about like what we normalize in our society and what we don't normalize. So from a public health standpoint, we went from laughing about domestic violence to really treating it as a serious subject that anyone is susceptible to. And it's not particular to any skin color or demographic. It's something that affects all people. And while we haven't done away with domestic violence, unfortunately, I think we have a much better grasp on it than we did 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I think that's what we need to do with all violent extremist ideologies is see this as something that it's not a political issue. It's a health issue. It's something that it can affect anybody and that anyone can fall prey to. And that's what Parents for Peace is about. That's why I chose to work with them. Parents for Peace has a great confidential helpline at 1-844-49-PEACE that anyone can call if they're worried about a loved one who's going down a dangerous path, or if they're an individual looking for help to get out themselves. We have a great triage team made up of mental health professionals who are standing by ready to help people. We can also be reached at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4.
Give that phone number again, Arno.
Phone number is 1-844-49-PEACE. And the website is parentsforpeace.org with the number 4.
Okay, and speaking of violent extremism today, one of the latest things that seem to raise concern is white nationalists and supremacists encouraging members of their organizations to put if they have tested positive for COVID-19, coronavirus, to put their body fluids into spray bottles and go to where blacks and Jews and people, that they're opposed to congregate and start spraying. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously you test it, but what are your thoughts about that? Is that something that shows potential in your opinion? Is it just talk? What is it?
I hope it remains just talk. I can't say for certain one way or another whether it is or not. I think what's very important when dealing with this type of thing, though, is to just be mindful that we're not doing terrorists' work for them. White nationalists are terrorists, just like the so-called Islamic State is, just like Al-Qaeda, just like Al-Shabaab. And go figure, the objective of a terrorist is to create terror. And that's what the people who attacked the World Trade Center on 9/11 did. That's what Anders Breivik did when he attacked the labor building in Oslo and the camp on Utøya Island. That's what all these attacks are meant to induce, is not necessarily the immediate toll of the people hurt or killed in the attack, but the reverberations of terror that will echo through society because of the attack. And so if we got a bunch of miserable white nationalists cackling together on 8chan or whatever the latest iteration of it is about essentially using COVID-19 as a bioweapon, we need to take that seriously. But we also have to be very aware that we're not giving it more life than it really should have. And it's a tricky position. It's not easy to do. I think a lot of the responsibility lies with the media in that we need to be wary of just like putting clickbait titles out there just to get eyes on a piece of content, and really make sure that we're not doing the terrorist work for them.
Absolutely. And, we often talk about, violent extremism. And when we use the word violent, people think about, mass killings, shootings, bombings, and things like that. And this particular biochemical weapon may not be the quote unquote violent. It's a stealth killer, and that also can be a form of extremism. And so that's, as you pointed out, that is something that we definitely need to be aware of and be cognizant of.
Absolutely.
Well, Arno, I really appreciate your time so much for coming on Changing Minds, and wish you all the success in the world. And let's do this again.
Thank you so much, amazing sir. I look forward to talking again soon, and hopefully we can see each other soon. We used to be able to hang out all the time back in the days when you could do that. So it won't be too long.
Yeah, that's right. It won't be too long, and we will get through this, and we'll get out of lockdown. And amazing sir, you and I will hang out again.
You know it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Daryl Davis. We'll see you all next time on
Changing Minds.